Hi, good morning. Let's talk about plants. Today we will talk about plants. That's Chloe. Chloe is not a plant. We're going to talk about plants today. So you want to have your lecture notes out, and here we go. We're going to open up the slides and talk about all of plants. We're looking at life's diversity, seedless, vascular, and seeded plants. By the end of this video, you will know what all of that means. And we'll do this both in lecture and lab this week. So don't worry, you're going to get plenty of practice when we're talking about plants. I think you need to think a plant today because they are amazing. All right, here we go. So a couple of videos to watch. And if you want to skim your text, again, the text is a 200 level text, so just skim it. But these are the two chapters that we're going to be looking at, seedless and seeded plants today. So where are plants and which domain do plants live in? Let's begin. Which domain do they reside in? Okay, and your lecture notes ask, what are the key features of plants and what do we know about plants? So what makes a plant, right? They're very closely related to green algae. I think it's on a couple of slides. So they originate from green algae. So what makes a plant? You already know some of this, right? So you can start thinking about that and start filling it in. What makes a plant a plant? They're really important to us, are they not? You either eat plants or that which ate a plant. So they are the producers from 101. Remember, they just produce everything. So here's the list. You can stop the video now if you want and write these things down. They have chloroplasts. They are eukaryotes. They do photosynthesis. Okay, so they create the food for us at least, and the food for heterotrophs at least on the planet. Okay, so they are the primary producers. They're multicellular, and they use these chlorophyll A, B, and carotene. So that it's kind of a little bizarre thing because this sets them aside from protists. But anyway, they use those three. And then there's a couple other things about their life history that we're not going to, alternation of generations, these things that are in the book, don't worry about those. We want this list here only for our class. Now, the history of plants, they've been around for a long time. Now, they've been around for a long time. Do you think they originated in water or land, and why? Because I'm going to ask you. We'll write it in the chat or we can discuss it on the Jamboard. But what do you think? Why do you think that they, where did they start? Did they start on land? Did they start in the water? And what do you think and why? So let me read this to you. Current evolutionary thought holds that all plants, some green algae as well as some land plants, are monophyletic. That means they're all related. They have the same common ancestor. They all came from the same place. The evolutionary transition from water to land imposed. So they started in the water, as did most stuff, right? So serious constraints when you were going to go onto land. There must have been good reason to go on land though, right? They had to develop strategies to avoid drying out, because in water, you don't have to worry about that. So desiccation or whatever. To disperse reproductive cells in the air instead of in the water. So your sperm can't swim in the water anymore, can't need water for your sperm. For structural support, defy gravity, right? And for capturing and filtering sunlight. So if you're in the water, there's not going to be that much sunlight, right? Refraction and all that. You come out of the water, it's like, oh, a lot of sunlight, that's great, except if you're not used to it, right? So lots of issues. And then it says, and we'll get to this later, while seed plants have developed adaptations that allow them to populate even the most arid habitats on Earth. That's not how it began, so we'll talk from the beginning. Full independence from water did not happen in all plants. This is true, and we're going to see, and a lot of them live in your yard that still depend on water. Most seedless plants require a moist environment. Okay, so you're starting to give this idea of seeded plants, non-seeded plants, defying gravity. These are going to be some things that we talk about as plants invade land. Happened a long time ago, did it not? So why was it hard to invade land? What are some of the problems? What are the problems with invading land? Well, if you live in the water, all your nutrients can just diffuse across to you. You can just sit there. So you don't have to worry about where your molecules, where your nutrients are going to come from. Okay, so that's one problem. Two, you need water, right? You're a plant, you need water. All plants need water. Well, we need water too, but all the plants need water. So what are you going to do about wilting, about losing the water, about it diffusing out of you? What about gravity? Can you just lay flat? Or you can need to have gravity, like our Douglas fir trees, okay? You've got intense sunlight. It used to be filtered. Now it's just sunlight on you, okay? Another problem is that reproduction. So plants, early plants, and plants in the water, so the green algae that we were talking about, the sperm swims in the water to fertilize the eggs, okay? The sperm swims in the water to fertilize the eggs, so you have to have water. So that's another problem, is reproduction. And then I wrote anything else, because maybe we'll come up with some other things. So lots of problems. Why? So the next question is, why would you even want to go on land? It seems like if you're in the water, everything's good. You've got all the, let me go back. You have all these problems about invading land. Why even bother with land? Why bother? So your book has 3 advantages, which you can click on that link and look and see. Maybe you can think of more. Why would you want to go onto land? This is a long time ago. Think about it. Were animals even there yet? We don't think so. And were other predators there yet? What about competition? So lots of reasons. We'll think of 3 and we'll write them down. Why invade land? Must have been a good idea. Okay, so what about some adaptations? Okay, so now we're going to invade, we're doing it. We're going to invade land. What are some adaptations that plants had the first plant? So all plants that are invading land, they're going to have a couple things. One is a cuticle, okay? So an outside protective layer over the plant so that I don't lose water. Gotta have it. So the cells, and we won't go into detail, we won't look in detail, but the cells on the outside of the plant have to have something, maybe a waxy substance, who knows, but they need to have something to protect that plant so it doesn't lose water, that much water. And then they also have something called stomata. I love them. They're little holes so that the cells can do gas exchange. Plants do gas exchange, like you and I do gas exchange, right? We learned this in 101. It was a long time ago. But plants do gas exchange too. What do they want to breathe in? Well, they want to breathe in carbon dioxide, opposite of us, and they give off oxygen. So they're kind of opposite of us. You and I breathe in what? Oxygen, and give off carbon dioxide or CO2, okay? So they also have to do gas exchange. So they have these little stomata, these little holes in the bottom, usually, not always, but in the bottom of their leaves, and they can give off gas. So those were 2 things that they had to do that were different than living in water. But they still relied on water a lot, and they couldn't live in areas where there wasn't water because of reproduction. That was the main problem with these first plants. So we're going to look at them in a second. The main problem was the sperm still had to swim to the egg. So even if you come on land, even if you have a cuticle and stomata, cool, but your sperm are going to be swimming. So you need some water nearby. So let's take a look. This is called a phylogenetic tree. If you took 102, this would look familiar. If you didn't, no problem, because what this shows is back here hold on, I'm going to annotate. When I annotate, it's not always pretty, but no problem. So back here, this is what we think was the common ancestor a long, long time ago. We're going to start our little tree from here, and it'll say, and so this first group, this first line, these are green algae, so they're not really plants. That's cool. And then next thing, this is going to be the first plants right here, the first plants. These are the liverworts. Okay, these first plants. Now liverworts, and you can write on your phylogenetic tree. I always write all over these things. So what you can do is you can write down traits down here on the line. That means that everybody after this spot, everybody that comes after this, all the plants that come after this, they have whatever that trait is. They have this thing or characteristic or whatever you want to call it, okay? So everybody here are plants. So you could write down plants. Like these are officially plants that go here where this purple line is. Okay, cool. And so they're plants, but they still have the sperm problem. So right now, the sperm is still swimming in the water, but they are plants, and liverworts have come onto land. So that's another thing that you could write. You could say a lot of liverworts, they live on land, okay? And then you can see the next thing we're going to go on and we can talk about mosses. Now there's mosses all over Oregon. So mosses, hornworts aren't as common, but mosses you definitely know. And mosses also have sperm that swim in water, so they have to be in moist environments. So yes, they live on land, but they still have the sperm thing, okay? And then we can keep going on. Club mosses, we probably won't cover that much, but they also have the problem. They also have that same problem with the sperm, okay? And we are going to talk about something about vascularity. So we'll talk about this trait, vascularity, as we go through. So you can see we can add things onto this line here, we can add things onto it, these traits that will help us understand how plants evolved, how they adapted, okay? So let's not worry about vascularity yet. We're just sort of talking about plants. You can see up here, these are called flowering plants or angiosperms. They're on here. You can see that gymnosperms are on here. These are things like Douglas fir trees that are outside. Ferns are on here. Yes, there's lots of ferns in the Pacific Northwest. So we're going to keep looking at this phylogeny, this plant phylogeny. You want to have this out. It's so great. It'll help us organize. I would write on it. If you print it, that's me. I'm a write. I like to write all over everything. But have it out so you can look at it, okay? All right. So address below while using the phylogeny. Point out where vascular plants or non-vascular plants are. We did that. Point out seeded and non-seeded. So let's go back. Then we're going to say add something about vascularity. So we can talk about vascularity if we want. Oh, and it's there. Roots, stems, and leaves, tubes for sugar. Okay, so we'll talk about it. Why does vascularity help defy gravity? Okay, so we've got some questions. So we're going to talk about using that phylogeny and talk about vascularity and also point out a couple things. Okay, let's go back. We're going to go back a slide if we can. Let's see. Okay, so we're back at that slide. And so one of the things it asks you is say, where did seeds happen? So plants beyond this, where's the trait of seeds? Plants beyond this place, okay? They're all going to produce seeds. And so you can see here, let me annotate. You can see here that seeds are here. That means that all organisms after that, the plants that are after that, they're going to be producing seeds, and seeds are really awesome. We'll talk more about them. And in lab 2, seeds are something to deal with so that you don't, your offspring, so that the baby plants do not dry out. This is very important, okay? So seeds and pollen, and we'll see that. So pollen is the sperm, and the sperm, the sperm do not need to swim in water. Major innovation. So we'll talk about that more. The other thing that we need to talk about though, right now, is vascularity. Okay, so let's do that. So this thing, vascular. Now vascular means a little different, something a little different in plants than it does in animals, but it's similar. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little arrow here, vascularity. So before this, if you look this way, they're not vascular. The plants are not vascular. If you look in this direction, all plants this way are vascular. Now, what does it mean to be vascular? So club mosses, ferns, gymnosperms, and flowering plants are all vascular. What does it mean? It means that you have a system, you have tubes, okay, vessels in your plant that carry the water and carry the sugar. So plants produce sugar from photosynthesis, and they get water from the roots. And that Those tubes, and they're called xylem and phloem. We'll learn that in lab. But these tubes, they go all over the plant. They help organize where the sugar in the water is traveling. This is really important to help organize the plant. The other thing is now vascularity, we're going to have true roots to get the water, to get the nutrients. We're going to have true stems above the ground, and we've got those tubes to help organize the plant. So vascularity means we've got the tubes, xylem and phloem. Just right now, just write down the tubes. You've got those vessels. And then we also have roots and stems. This is going to help us get taller. So it's going to help us defy gravity because we're now organized. We've got these tubes, we can be taller. We also have roots that can anchor us down, okay? So vascularity is a really big thing. Really, really big. All right, now let's go to the next slide and check this out. See if we answered those questions. Vascularity. Okay, so it says, add something about vascularity. Roots, stems, leaves. Tubes for sugar and water. We'll name them xylem and phloem. We'll name them in lab. Why does vascularity help defy gravity? That's going to be on your homework this week. Why does vascularity help fight gravity? What do you think? Are there any hemlocks or trees that are not vascular? Ask yourself. What do you think? Even if you don't know, what do you think? Okay. They're gymnosperms, by the way. That might help. Always go back to your phylogeny. If you're a visual learner, you can always go back to that phylogeny. I am a visual learner, so I would have to go back and write on that phylogeny, that slide, okay? If you're an auditory learner, you can just write on your lecture notes and that will completely make sense, okay? How would this be advantageous? Vascularity, how would it be advantageous if you're a habitant, if you inhabit a forest or a swamp? Why would this be an advantage? What do you think? See if I can go back a slide here. You're in a forest. All of these organisms here are vascular, okay? Everybody, ferns, we have a lot of ferns. Club mosses too, but I kind of don't ever talk about those because there aren't that many left. So I don't worry about club mosses that much. Ferns, gymnosperms, flowering plants, they're all vascular. Why is that an advantage? Very big advantage if you're living in a place like a forest, okay? What can ferns get? I don't want to give too much of this away. All right. Write it down. We'll be going over it in lecture. Okay. All right. All right, now look back at your phylogeny again. Which groups need to be near water? Which groups need to be near water and why? And then we're going to go on to talk about which groups have pollinators, pollen, seeds, and what advantages do seeds have over non-seeded. Okay, so we're going to go back to the phylogeny and answer these questions. So stay with me. Here we go. Okay, have that sheet out. And so one of the questions was, who needs to have water? Okay, so that means your sperm are swimming to the egg. So it's for reproduction. Which with these groups? Well, the answer is everybody before seeds. So everybody here, all of these, everybody here need to have their sperm swim to the egg. That means they cannot live in dry environments. They have to be around water because the sperm swim to the egg. So ferns out in if you have ferns in your yard, if you see ferns, it might look like it's dry some of the year. Those ferns cannot reproduce unless it rains, right? Because they need to have the sperm swim to the egg, okay? Boom, what happens next? It turns out with the advent of seeds and pollen, you can write seeds and pollen here if you want, because it's seeds and pollen, okay? With the advent of seeds and pollen, we have the answer, we have the adaptation for living in dry environments. We don't need water above the ground, anymore. I mean, we still need water, right? But we don't need it for our sperm anymore. So pollen is desiccated sperm, okay? They look really cool under the microscope. They're desiccated sperm, and they can fly in the air, to find the egg. This is huge. You don't need water anymore. So gymnosperms, like fir trees, okay? Douglas fir trees and hemlock and pine trees, they don't need it. And neither do any flowering plants. If a plant like tomatoes and tulips and lilies, they do not need, they have seeds and pollen. Now, seeds are when the sperm and egg come together and make a baby. That baby is called a seed, okay? Those seeds are also very much can disperse in a dry environment. So they have solved the water problem. Solved the water problem. Okay, so the seeded plants are gymnosperms and flowering plants are angiosperms. Okay, those are the seeded plants. Okay, they have seeds. Who are the vascular plants? Let's take a look at this. I'm going to do a different color. I'm going to do it in red. Who are the vascular plants? Everybody beyond the trait of vascularity. All of these plants are vascular. See how to read this? So this is a great thing to have handy when you're taking a quiz, when you're taking a test. Have that out and everything that you wrote on it, okay? All right, let's see if we can get to the next slide. Just make sure. Okay, which groups have pollinators? So what is a pollinator? We'll talk more about this in lab. What is a pollinator? A pollinator is, so you want to get your sperm, your plant. By the way, you're a plant. You want to get your sperm to the egg and you can't move because you're a plant. What if I can get somebody to do it for me? So sex is very different in plants, by the way. So I want to get somebody to help me take my sperm to an egg on a different plant. Well, why not have like a little bee or a butterfly or a bird or a bat come along, or an ant come along and get my sperm, the pollen, and bring it over to an egg? Why not? Why not? All right. Well, the only individuals that have pollinators are flowering plants. Okay, so look at your phylogeny. It's the last group. Angiosperms or flowering plants are the only group that have pollinators. Which groups have pollen? That's your desiccated sperm. Which groups have pollen? You tell me, which groups have pollen? Which groups have seed? So if you want to look on your traits, right? If it says seeded, everybody else. So it's gymno and angio or flowering plants, okay? What advantages do seeds have over non-seeded? And that's, we'll talk about, I'll harass you in the chat box, but don't forget it's about water and where you can live. And think about how advantageous it would be if you could live in a desert over anybody that couldn't, right? If they needed water all the time. Aha. Okay. So it says, these next questions, use your phylogeny to answer. So moss. So just now what you want to do, and we're going to do more of this in lab. Now what you want to do is just say, moss. Can I understand what's happening with moss? Is it vascular? Do they have seeds? Do they have fruit? We haven't talked about fruit much, but fruit are only produced by flowering plants. And we'll talk about it in lab too, okay? But moss, are they vascular? Do they have seeds? Don't worry about fruit yet. Does the sperm need water to swim? Take a look at that phylogeny. Don't memorize, understand. So this is one of those things about learning how to learn, right? Learning how to learn biology. What I want you to do is, I don't want you to memorize about moss, and I don't want you to memorize about ferns, and I don't want you to memorize about flowering plants. What I want you to do is understand. So take that phylogeny or write it down. I understand how these plants are related to each other. I understand how the traits are related. So when did vascularity happen? When did seeds happen? Okay. Who had sperm swimming to the egg still? And moss did. Yeah, moss cannot live in dry places. All right, good. Good, good. Okay. Oh, look at this beautiful slide. Vascular plants can be divided into two groups. Vascular plants. Okay. So you're going to look at your phylogeny. Look at your phylogeny again. Look at that phylogenetic tree. And what are the two groups beyond it? It's three groups. There's a lie on this. It's ferns, gymno, and angio. Sorry, there's three groups. I think that's what I'm trying to refer to, and I can't say two. I can't say three. I clearly just can say two because I can't count, I guess. So ferns, gymno, angio, okay? Does it make sense? Yes, it should. Remember, you can write your traits down below. All right. How is vascularity an advantage? This will be on your homework. We did talk about it a little bit, but I just want you to start to think about, it was really important to get organized and to get vascular with those tubes and your roots and your leaves and your stems, okay? Make way for plants with seeds. So who are the groups? There's only two groups that have plants with seeds: Gymnosperms and Angiosperms. Gymnosperms and flowering plants, that's it, okay? And they took over the earth, by the way. I mean, they are predominant, they are diverse, they are successful. So first we're gonna talk about Gymnosperms because Gymnosperms mean naked seed. That's what they mean. And so if you go out into our Pacific Northwest forest and you look up, generally you're looking at mostly Gymnosperms. If it has big leaves, like the alder and the maples, those are Angiosperms. So you're looking at flowering plants too, okay? So you have both. So the big advantages are seeds and pollen. I don't need water for reproduction anymore. I can live in dry places. Make way. This was a huge innovation on our earth. Okay, and so look at the phylogeny. What are the two groups? We already said what they are. Which are you most familiar with? Maybe you're familiar with all the flowers that you see out there. Those are the flowering plants, okay? So that's on the left bottom here. Maybe you're more familiar with the wood that we make here in Oregon, mostly comes from Gymnosperms. Which are you more familiar with? Okay, and we'll talk more in lab about these. But they make seeds. Both of these groups make seeds. These are pumpkin seeds. That's an angio, that's a flowering plant. You're not going to have to name a bunch of flowering plants, don't worry. We just want to kind of get the idea that Gymnosperms are things like pine trees and Douglas fir trees and hemlocks and all those big woody trees that we make here in, for export that we make here in Oregon. Flowering plants are those that make flowers, okay, make flowers. That was a big innovation that they made. They make flowers and fruit. We'll talk about that in a sec. Okay, so pollen and seeds, big innovation, gymnos and angios did. Pollen, the first to make, look back at your phylogeny, the first to make pollen and seeds are the gymnos. The gymnos are older. Gymnosperms have been around longer. They are older, absolutely older. Naked seeds, okay? They do not make flowers or fruit. They make cones, okay? And we'll talk about it in lab. But Gymnosperms actually dominated the earth for a long, long time, we think, from the fossil record. They were here. There were no flowering plants. There were no pollinator. Well, there might have been bees and such, but there was no pollination going on because there were no flowers. Can you imagine a world without flowers? So Gymnosperms use cones for reproduction, okay? And they don't make flowers and they don't make fruit. But a star was born, and we call it the rise of the Angiosperms, the rise of flowering plants. They perfected life on land. I don't know, I just use the word perfected, but they changed life on land. They changed life. There's about 300,000 species of plants, and guess how many are angios? A lot. They diversified, they are successful, they took over, they dominated, they won, for sure. Every ecosystem has flowering plants, every ecosystem. So on Earth. So they are very, very successful. And so we're going to talk a little bit about angiosperms. Why are they so successful? What made them more successful over the gymno? Flowers. They make fruit. Why is that so? Why are flowers, like, what are flowers for? Are they just for us to look at? What do flowers do for the plants? What do flowers do for the plants? Again, I have a link for us to look at about different pollinators, but flowers and pollinators. Flowers are for advertisement. They often have nectar or a little bit of sugar substance for my happy little pollinator. I want to attract my pollinator. I'm going to make flowers. What's the pollinator going to do for me? Move my sperm. Move my sperm. That's that's their sex. Okay, really interesting, isn't it, when you start to think about it? And we'll talk about pollinators in lab and specific types of pollinators and what types of flowers they prefer. It's very, very interesting. We'll talk about it. But flowers were a huge innovation. Flowers. And don't forget, this bee is not seeing in the wavelengths of the normal spectrum of light, visible spectrum of light. They're not using that. They're using the ultraviolet spectrum, which we can't see. Isn't that amazing? So anyway, oh my goodness. We'll talk about pollinators in lab. What advantages do angiosperms, flowering plants, have over gymno? They have fruits, they have flowers. This is major because they're fruits. That's what holds the seeds. So fruits hold the seeds. You can see a bunch of fruits here that we eat, right? And a lot of times there are seeds still in the fruit. Some of them we have engineered, like bananas. Bananas are not wild bananas anymore. They don't have the seeds anymore inside of them. But wild bananas still have the seeds, right? And what are they doing? Those fruits, they help get the seeds to the next generation. A lot of times those fruits have nice nutrients for the seeds, or they have, and we'll talk about this in lab, seed dispersal is very important for flowering plants. They produce a fruit and they're hoping that it gets far away from the parent. We'll talk about this more in lab. And are angiosperms, are flowering plants important? Now, we already know that gymnosperms are important because we cut down the trees, right? That's one product that we have. But we also use plants for medicine. And so here's just a few of the things that we use plants for. Just take a look. Cancer chemotherapy, decongestant. Ephedrine is from a plant. So plants are not just food. We're constantly finding new plants in the rainforest, in areas that we haven't researched for new medicines that we didn't know about before. Want to keep the plant diversity around. And here's just one of the reasons why. Plants are crucial. Obviously, we eat plants, so or those that eat the plants. So we need plants, right? They're the base of our food chain. They are critical to us. So plant a tree. This isn't even talking about global warming or climate change or any of that stuff. Plants are important. Pollinators are important. Because why? For us and for others too, and for the planet. Anyway, that was a big chapter, and I'm so glad that you stayed with me throughout it, and we'll talk more about these topics in lecture.